Broadcasting from Washington, D.C., this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This episode of Insider's Guide to Energy EV miniseries is powered by Power. Power helps your business transition to electric vehicles by simplifying charging, managing payments, and optimizing your charging data. Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy EV series. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me today is Niall Riddell. Neil, we've got an amazing show coming up today.
We certainly do. This is a gentleman I've wanted to speak to for a long time to ask him a couple of awkward questions. We've got Dan Caesar with us today, who's the CEO at the Fully Charged Show. Dan, do you want to say hello?
Hello, Chris. Hi, Neil. It's fantastic to see you.
It's great that you're here. And I guess one of the very easy opening questions we should be asking ourselves, although many people probably already know the answer, is who are you? What do we do? What do you do? What is the Fully Charged Show?
So I'm the CEO of the Fully Charged Show, which started life as a YouTube channel back in 2010, dedicated to the energy transition away from combustion towards cleaner, greener technologies, with a real focus on electric cars and electric vehicles, but actually a much wider purpose, really, which is to get people to talk about these post-combustion technologies. You may heard us use the phrase "stop burning stuff." You know, we're moving away from fossil fuels, and our kind of mission really is to help people understand, how to get into electric electric vehicles in general, clean energy as well. But we are a consumer channel with 1 million subscribers on YouTube, a series of events around the world now, podcast, and some other stuff that I'm sure we'll come on to.
And if I was to take you right back to the beginning, when did it start and why did it start?
Well, it started in 2010. A gentleman that some people might have know of and others may not is our founder, Robert Llewellyn. He had the foresight to build a YouTube channel back in 2010 to talk about what was then a very niche topic, I think. But he came out of a background of TV, so he was pretty well known in the UK as being Crichton, the mechanoid from Red Dwarf, and that's streamed all around the world. So he's pretty well known, although he's kind of covered in latex when he does that, so maybe not immediately recognizable. And then he followed that up by hosting something in the UK, which is called Scrap Heap Challenge. And in the US and Canada was syndicated heavily as Junkyard Wars. And towards the kind of late noughties, he was spending quite a lot of time in California, and he was seeing what was coming out of Silicon Valley, particularly around batteries and electric tech. And at that point, GM had its mothballed its EV1, its first electric car. Tesla Roadster was becoming a thing, and he just found that fascinating. And he'd always been, in his own words, a bit of a hippie, a bit interested in, isn't there a better way of doing this, a better way of powering our energy and transport? And so decided to start a YouTube channel. Age, I think 55 at the time, as you do, had this incredible way of communicating. We all know engineers. I've worked with very many, and I love them all, every single one of them. But occasionally engineers get straight into the weeds, and when you're trying to convince people about these new technologies, sometimes you need to keep it really simple, right? So he created something. We met in 2016. I'd been in the energy industry for, I guess, best part of 15 years at that point. I'd been in solar and batteries and heat. I already had an electric car, and I was going to loads of different B2B events in the industry. And I was saying, this is great. We all think solar is great. We all think batteries are the way forward, electric vehicles, etc. But maybe we need to get out there and stop telling each other how great it is. And maybe we actually need to start addressing the consumer audience. And that's what Robert had done. And when I met him, I was like, wow, you've cracked it here. You've got something amazing. Let me come and help you.
And you just literally said that. Can I come on board?
Pretty much. I mean, I actually said to him, I actually had a big assumption, which is I presumed this is a YouTube channel. I knew almost nothing about YouTube at that point. I presumed you're already making money and this is already viable. To which I think he sort of uttered the word help, because the reality was that for smaller YouTube channels, that just wasn't the case. Actually, the revenue you get out of YouTube, all that money aggregates away actually towards Google, towards YouTube. So if you've got a really, really big channel, like Mr. Beast, I think has got 100 times more subscribers than we have, 100 million, then you can make a lot of revenue out of that. A smaller channel, which it was at the time, I think when Robert and I met, it had 60,000 subscribers, just didn't make any money. And let's be honest, Robert was probably putting his own money into getting it going. And I said, well, look, I share your passion. I've been promoting heat pumps and this sort of stuff for years as well. but I actually come from a kind of, I don't really like the word entrepreneur particularly, but I come from that kind of background, and I think I can help you turn this into a business. At least sort of struck up a rapport, because I think I felt very, very strongly, I believe very, very strongly in the technologies, as did he, which is why we think we got on well from the beginning. And then we had to puzzle it over and say, well, how are we gonna make this make money? And that was 7 years ago, and it's been a lot of fun.
Now, is there a run that takes place, because you're B2C educating people on electric vehicles? They're just about becoming mainstream. If you go to just about any dealer, they have some sort of EV in their lineup today. And in some countries, the internal combustion engine is going to go completely away. Do we still need to be priming the pump here?
That's a fantastic question. My answer is probably going to be yes. And a strong yes. Now, whether you believe me or not, I mean, I think it does. The reason for that is I think we're an antidote to a lot of the misinformation that's out there, and there is a lot of misinformation. Anything that's poorly understood leads to myths and misinformation, rumor and conjecture. And equally, mainstream media just hasn't stepped up to the plate on this sort of thing. You will not find an electric Top Gear. You will not find anything equivalent to that in the mainstream media. And most people in the US and the UK, around the world, but particularly the UK and the US, can't have missed the fact that this has become a big political football. And therefore, if we were to say to the BBC, why don't you do an electric Top Gear? They'd be like, well, we should include hybrids in that, right? And we should include hydrogen. We were like, no, actually, that's not where this is going. But a lot of the independent broadcasters want balance. And actually, we have chosen the technology now. Consumers are now voting in large numbers for pure electric cars. And if you look at Norway, which is the world's leading market in terms of penetration, then they're not going for hydrogen cars. They're abandoning fossil fuel cars in their droves. They're not going for hybrids either. They're going for pure electric. And that's what we think we'll see play out. But I think it's a long journey. That will still be carrying on for another 5, 10, and perhaps in some parts of the world, sort of 15, 20 years. So we do think there's a strong need for Fully Charged Show and others like your good selves to keep communicating that for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to the topic of FUD and misinformation. But, if we go back to the beginning where you were in sort of 2016, you had a YouTube channel, you had some subscribers. What was the journey like to go from YouTube channel through into actually putting on a show? Because, I mean, there weren't many electric cars in 2016. How did you put a show on? And, what was the reception to those first events?
Yeah, that was a kind of a pivotal moment, really, for us. I had quite a lot of event experience. I think if someone else had come into my role and helped Robert out, they would have come from a very different angle. But you can make money from events. You can make money from those sort of, from exhibitors, from sponsors, from ticket sales, etc. So I felt quite confident that would be a success. I was sick of events actually at that point. I actually wasn't that keen to do that, and because it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of graft, as is a YouTube channel, by the way. And I was getting to a point where I had young kids, but it became unavoidable. Really, we had to go down that path. So I suggested it to Robert almost 6 years ago to the day. We announced that we were going to do our first Fully Charged live exhibition at Silverstone. That came around in, I think, summer of 2018. And it was a big hit, but I put that more down to the fact that Robert had a huge amount of followers already. Passionate army of people who may have got a Gen 1 Nissan Leaf or a BMW i3 or a Renault Zoe, or maybe they got a Tesla Model S, Tesla Model X. So the response to that, Robert thought no one was going to turn up. And I would say to him, look, I've done this before when I've had no audience. I've built audience, so you'll be fine, because people will want to come. And lo and behold, that first day at Silverstone, we ran out of vegan and vegetarian food within about an hour. The police were called because the amount of traffic locally, people were licking the windows to get in, an hour before the show was open. So we were off to a kind of a flying start, really. And the great question is, what was there to display at that point? And we made a big thing about the fact that we would have, every single electric vehicle available. And from the OEMs at that point, there was only really about 10. So it wasn't many, so we were able to get those. We were able to supplement that with other interesting electric vehicles, all shapes and sizes, some clean tech too. But we really started from the point of view that if no exhibitors come, can we still give the ticket holders, good value for money? And so we had lots of live theatres and other attractions to make sure that was the case. So that was an amazing moment.
So I've just pulled out a picture from 2018 which is me at the Silverstone event in what was at the time the brand new Nissan Leaf.
Right.
And 100%, there really weren't that many choices on the market then. But it was the first time I'd heard of fully charged. I went to fully charged, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. So I was right there at that baptism right at the beginning. So for me, it's always been a live event, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, we've loved doing it, and since then as you may know, we've done it in Texas, California, Canada, Australia, Europe, different venues across the UK as well. And we're evolving that formula very quickly. And it's been a tremendous experience, and against the backdrop of some slightly tricky circumstances. With we don't have to go through the full list of the Black Swan events and other events that have taken place in the last 2 or 3 years that have kind of hampered business growth, but we've been able to grow very, very quickly in spite of all that. So I feel quite tired at the time of speaking. We've delivered 5 events around the world this year. We're doing another 5 next year. But it's been a great way to amplify the YouTube channel. And what I think is interesting is people watch the YouTube channel to do their desktop research, which cars I'm interested in. Am I interested in the heat pump? How do I go about that, etc. And then they come to the live events to actually test drive them or buy them. That's the sort of thing. So the two things have worked incredibly well together.
How is that merging in with traditional auto shows? So one of my kids' favorite things these days when you go to the auto show, because with electric vehicles, they now run them inside the building. Like here in DC, when you go to the auto show, they have an entire building where you actually go drive and race around inside the warehouse, basically, which you couldn't do in auto shows in the past because you had to be outside. How is that playing with a modern auto show, which has plenty of electric vehicles to get a lot of thrills?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mean, we've got a big show coming up in London at the XL at the end of March. And, the way that will work from a test drive perspective is that the cars will come into the hall and people will be able to get in them and then drive them out onto the local road, which is obviously a massive advantage against what we've been able to do with combustion engine vehicles. You couldn't really drive them into big exhibition halls because of the fumes, etc. So that's been amazing. And then also within the halls, we have things like areas you can test electric bikes. I mentioned we have theatres full of experts. We have lots of other features. We have a zero carbon kitchen, which is chefs cook plant-based food powered by an electric car. We have an area called the Home Energy Advice team. This year we're doing live reviews. We have kids zone. There's loads. I mean, there's more than that. There's loads of these different visitor attractions. So we feel that we're very, very different to the traditional motor show, which relies very, very heavily on the cars and the car companies participating. We obviously try and get as many of those as possible, but our offering is much, much more diverse. And what we've seen is that we're kind of like the electric home and motor show, I would say. Those two things have been separate, home and motor show, but now they're joined by a cable. So actually a powerful opportunity for us. And everything in between, like we're super excited, for example, about vehicle to load and vehicle to grid and all that sort of stuff as well. So we're evolving really, really fast. I feel for the auto shows, I think some of them have struggled in recent years. There'll always be the big ones that I think will carry on, and they're kind of evolving themselves. But typically, the car market is an extremely volatile space, and most car companies now would rather do digital activity than do loads of motor shows. So there'll always be the bigger shows that I think will survive. But I think the angle that we're coming from gives us greater durability, more versatility. And there's loads of people who have got solar panels on their roof, and therefore they then want to look at an electric car, or vice versa. So I think for us, it's always scraping in those newbies, that emergent marketplace, because the people who used to buy petrol cars and rave about the fact they made a lot of noise and smoke, they're not the same people who are buying electric cars by any means.
How do you see that changing? Because, go back to 2018, there were 10 models, there were, a limited number of buyers. They were like super tech geeks or people who are really passionate about the green environment. We've now got a world where, like Chris mentioned, pretty much every dealer's got something on the forecourt that is now electric. We are seeing parts of society where we're possibly going through early and mainstream adopters into even some of the later adopters, particularly in corporates that are pushing this agenda. What are you seeing that's different between that first period when it was all newbie buyers to the period now when actually it's becoming a mainstream technology?
So I think if you're familiar with a sort of classic marketing adoption curve, the adoption of new technologies, what you typically see is, your pioneers first and then your early adopters. I think you're right. I think we're approaching in some countries the end of that phase, and then we're moving more to that early mainstream. And then the rump of that graph, actually, if you look at it by total, is actually late mainstream and laggard. And we're seeing some really, really interesting things play out. Like, I'm starting to look at car company activity, for example, where they're doing mass marketing of electric vehicles. And that's very welcome on one level because it provides legitimacy. But at the same time, mass marketing, nice shiny adverts about why you should get an electric car to a laggard or to late mainstream, it feels to me like an absolute waste of money, because those people might not get an electric car for another 5-10 years. Over my dead body, that kind of thing. You might have heard that occasionally from people. So really, it is about approaching that early mainstream. Who are they? And typically, they tend to be more progressive tech people. Makes total sense, right? If you think about it, less wedded to older technologies, more progressive, more open-minded about new technologies. So we see that a lot. And then we also have this audience for the Fully Charged show of pioneers and early adopters who 9 out of 10 of them will only ever buy electric ever again. And as the infrastructure gets better and all those things get better, we think that 9 out of 10 will become more like 9.5 out of 10, 9.9 out of 10 in the not too distant future. So it's fascinating to observe. But if you look at the way the car companies spend their money, I think they're still in that mindset of it's just going to be the same as marketing our current cars. I don't think it is. I think this is an emergent market. In the UK, for example, about 25,000 new electric vehicles get sold every month. That is a tiny, tiny, tiny fragment of the UK market. Over 2 years, you might look at 500, 600,000 new EVs sold. That's only about 10% of the people with a driving license. Sorry, 1% of people with a driving license in the UK. So it's a tiny fragment each month. And if I had a crystal ball and said, I know where those people are going to be, you'd want to know that. So we're seeing some really, really interesting behaviors. Now I see a big mainstream campaign. I'm like, save your money. Actually, not everyone's ready for that, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. It's often compared to the switch to the smartphone. You remember BlackBerry and the switch to the smartphone? That was incredibly rapid because smaller tech, more quickly replaced, typically on a 2-year contract. The car thing is going to take a bit longer, well into this, and I think most of Western Europe will see penetration of EV sales up at 80, 90, 100% by the end of this decade, which sounds quick, I know, but I think it's really going to happen that quickly.
You're talking about the end vehicle is the exciting, the advertising. I know the biggest pushback I hear, having moved back to the US from Europe, is the infrastructure. Right, folks, we're not ready for that. I'm not going to drive my EV across the country because, gosh, I have to stop and wait 20 minutes to charge a thing, and there's not going to be a charge point anywhere where I need to be. Doesn't that advertising, though, help socialize the need for the infrastructure and help people be more placid with infrastructure going in?
It does. It legitimizes the whole thing, on a very subconscious level. If you see mainstream advertising, you think, well, all the car companies seem to be piling into this, therefore, slowly the kind of objections melt away. And I think there's 3 things going on. Part of that's the reason. Another part of, the mainstream advertising is that car companies are keen to show that they are moving in this direction. Even if they aren't manufacturing in vast quantities, they're keen to show people that they're doing the right thing. And then you get other car companies like Tesla or BYD. For your audience who are less familiar with that, BYD being soon to be the biggest electric vehicle company in the world, just about to overtake Tesla at the end of this quarter or the next quarter, who will sell you every single electric car they can make, as opposed to some of the others, maybe like VW, who've had some demand issues. So it is interesting. I mean, I would say also you've got this amazing thing. Robert and I used to talk about this phrase a lot, and it's not our phrase, but the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And the reality is that what we're seeing in Norway, we think will happen in other places. The UK actually is not up to that standard. The Netherlands is further ahead than us. Iceland's further ahead than us. But the US is actually a little bit of a way back. I hate to say that, Chris, but that's the reality. The US is used to being first on most things, so it's a bit of a shock. And the US obviously has these huge open spaces, but for the vast bulk of drivers, they just don't need as much range as they think they do.
When you say that, Tesla perhaps being an American company and helping lead this charge, and the numbers you gave in the UK, I mean, even 0.5% of US car sales is still a pretty significant number, is it not? So if you have Texas, California, Colorado, and a few East Coast cities, that's a fair number of EVs.
Yes, I mean, America has, Tesla has come out of America. It's come out of California originally. Obviously, it's been kind of rehoused in Texas. Its significance cannot be understated. Without the Tesla movement, we would not be where we are. It has kicked in the pants all of those other car companies who said, "Oh, Tesla will go bankrupt. They won't be able to do any volume. This is going to be over soon." And how wrong they were. They are at a run rate of almost 2 million electric cars a year now. BYD is at similar level. So Tesla has kicked this off. America has had a slightly unusual relationship with Tesla, though, because even Joe Biden, who's introduced the Inflation Reduction Act over the last 15 months or so in the US, has had a thorny problem to deal with. That is that the US economy also needs GM and Ford to succeed as well. And Tesla has, as an outlier, had some advantages that Ford is pretty committed to this. I think we see some good noises from Ford, but GM has really, really struggled. And there's also things like unionization, right, to get to grips with. There's a lot of different factors. So the US market is probably the single most interesting, but by volume at the moment, it's really bi-coastal. It's the West Coast and the East Coast that's driving it, and everything in between. EV update, apart from little places like Austin, where we used to do a show, so we know that quite well. Places like that, there are obviously outliers, but generally it's an East Coast, West Coast thing where that's moving really, really fast. So if you go to California, you'll see plenty of Teslas, absolutely loads, in fact. But the reality is that America is, just such a vast space that it can be really different, your experience from one place to another.
We've talked a lot about the fact that this is coming, and there's some good logical evidence to show that, but it does seem like the mainstream media seems to be on a bit of a different trajectory at the moment. Can we talk a little bit about what is the Stop Burning Everything campaign all about? Why are we in a world whereby mainstream media has responded so negatively? And what are you guys in particular doing about it?
Yeah, so we have tried to stay above the political fray. We think this is a global megatrend that trumps politicians. We think it's bigger than that. Politicians have got lots of levers at their disposal. They can slow things down a little bit. They can't necessarily stop them. But it was disturbing to us to see the amount of misinformation, particularly in the British press, from the beginning of 2023. We are expecting an onslaught of misinformation in the US next year as the presidential election campaign ramps up. I can feel the misinformation is being fired up as Trump tries to dismantle Biden's legacy and pull apart things like the Inflation Reduction Act. So we saw a lot more misinformation. So we've started an initiative called Stop Burning Stuff, which also shortens to Stop BS. Where we actually can, we can take on the misinformation we're seeing in media, whether it's digital media, whether it's TV, whether it's print. We can talk to politicians, and we can start to say, no, if you're worried about the composition of batteries, for example, how long they'll last and where the materials come from, and are they cleaner and greener than combustion engine vehicles, we can actually put the truth across. And we've made some progress in that respect, but at the moment, if you tell me where there's an electric car TV channel, for example, or a clean energy TV channel on any of the domestic broadcasters like the BBC in the UK, or the streamers like the Disneys and Netflix and Amazons, and I would say, well, but there isn't one. How come? That's bizarre now as we move towards these new technologies, and we would love to be that provider of that information on one of those channels, of course, but the way we see it, the fragmentation of media has meant that it's YouTube really that's given people the opportunity to talk about electric vehicles, and that's where a lot of the action is. And at some point, I'm sure a traditional broadcaster or a streamer will kind of get in on the act there, because these technologies are here to stay fundamentally. So yeah, Stop Burning Stuff for us is just the opportunity to correct some of the lies. We've seen some staggering lies and exaggeration, misinformation, misrepresentation in the British press. And as I say, I think we might see some of that in the US in the next year as well.
What are some of these lies that you're hearing, or what are some of the most outlandish ones that you think need to be dispelled?
There's some that carry a little bit of weight and you have to fight harder to push against, and there are others that are absolutely insane, and most people can see through that and can laugh about them. So on the latter point, there were some speculations that all of our cars will be shut down by foreign governments soon and we won't be able to drive them. Even the Top Gear guys had a good laugh at that. Said if you wanted to shut down all the cars in the UK or the south of the UK, it wouldn't make any difference because it's gridlocked there already. So the reality is you can't. It doesn't work like that. That's not possible. And that car parks would collapse because electric vehicles are so much heavier. Now in the US, you'll be aware, for example, cars are pretty heavy already. There's some pretty big cars. It's strange that argument is being made now. So there's some which are, I think are, really ridiculous, sort of pretty much your equivalent of sort of, flat Earth, as far as conspiracy theories are concerned. And there are others that do carry more weight. As I said, are they greener? Are they cleaner and greener when you account for all the material extraction, all those sorts of things? And yes, they are. So that's a good one to push back against, the fact that actually if you do all the emissions life cycles, actually these cars are actually cleaner and greener after just 16,000 kilometers. Then you can show that. And you can also say not only are they cleaner and greener, but actually the batteries are going to get recycled. Another thing that comes up frequently is cobalt. There are emotive images of young boys mining cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And even though that's an infinitesimally small part of the cobalt industry, we take it seriously, but the reality is now there are new chemistries that don't have cobalt at all. So a lot of these things can be used to good effect, and misinformation is a real thing. If you look at Merchants of Doubt, the book which talks about how they kind of sort of managed to fill the world full of doubt about smoking, for example, that was a very positive playbook, and big oil is trying the same thing again with electric cars. It depends, really. I would say anyone who reads or watches anything should really, really question whether it's true or not. That's the era, that's the world we live in now, right? I think that's really, really important. So, but from a perspective of these technologies, are they cleaner? Yes, they are. And also the way we generate the power in the first place is going to get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. So electric cars are cleaner now, even off the dirtiest grid, even off a coal-fire powered grid. And they can get much, much cleaner as we clean our grids up. And of course, what an amazing thing. I mean, I have solar at my house, and I can charge my car off the solar panels, for example. I would be frightened if I was big oil as well. And if I was their lobbyist, I might well be pumping, disinformation into public discourse too.
Is there a public health benefit that people are seeing? I know in Europe, one of the things that drove me nuts is everything is diesel. Everywhere you go, all you do is smell that diesel, and can't be particularly healthy from studies I've seen to breathe all that diesel. Is there a public health element that people don't normally bring up when we're talking EVs in the cities particularly?
There's a very significant element. It's not my specialism, but even, anything you combust, will have an effect on your respiratory system. A lot of the things that get pumped out the back of the vehicles are carcinogenic. I recently held a panel where I was talking about indoor cooking. Even indoor cooking can give you real serious respiratory problems. So anytime you burn anything, that creates a lot of problems. And obviously with electric cars, you just don't have that issue. So we have a few years now of experience of communicating these things. We do talk about air pollution on the Fully Charged show. We do talk about, climate impacts as well, but we don't talk about them often. We typically focus on how cool and how much better the technology is. Because what we find is if we mention the words air pollution, or we mention the words climate change, a large percentage of people switch off subconsciously, I think. So actually, we're really keen to point across this is cool new technology.
So you've kind of set up the next question, which is, come on then, what's the coolest thing you've seen this year?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. I think, from my point of view, I'll come up with a sort of sexier answer, and then I'll come up with something a bit more mundane, if that's okay. But I think the kind of the more mundane is that this movement, towards these technologies has continued to grow in spite of some extremely serious headwinds, both economic and political. So that gives us great comfort. So one of the bits of misinformation at the moment is that EV sales are down in the US, and that's not true at all. What it means is actually what you're seeing is some of the lots have got EVs on them because some of the car companies have over predicted how many electric cars they would sell. But actually, the reality is that the growth continues. I think in terms of the technologies we've seen, we do like the cars, and it's like living in a candy shop. I get to see all the cars, which is great. I get to drive a few of them. We're, really, really into the home energy technology. as well, and we're seeing some good movement in that respect. But I think the thing that I find particularly exciting is probably this, this vehicle to everything technology, vehicle to load, vehicle to good. I find that to be potentially the biggest unlocker of all, when people can suddenly see their vehicles not just as vehicles, because let's be honest, your vehicle is unused 95% of the time, but as assets, where you can trade energy, as backup, where you can actually, maybe avoid a power cut in the future. I think that is incredibly compelling. And once people see that, the smartphone is different to the dumb phone. The smartphone does all these things, apps, etc. Why is it even called a phone? It's a computer, right? The electric vehicle is a massive step forward on the combustion engine vehicle. And I think once people see that and everything can do, particularly when they see they've got a battery on their drive, then that's going to really unlock the potential of this market.
And definitely that aligns really well with what Neil and I do here on the Insider's Guide to Energy, talking about the infrastructure and how that plays in the EV space. But what we don't get to do is some of the cool stuff you guys do on your show. The other day I watched in my Instagram feed someone saying that the supercar era is dead.
At the moment I have a Tesla, and it's pretty quick, and it's every bit of as quick as I need it. But I'm a fairly normal guy. I mean, I like cars, but I would never have described myself as a petrol head. I think there will always be a group of people who want something a little bit more extreme. I don't know if you saw it the other day, but it's a slightly bonkers vehicle, and I probably wouldn't get one in the UK. I probably wouldn't be able to drive it anywhere. But if I lived in America, might be a bit more tempted by the Cybertruck thing. And I think there are some supercars. There's an amazing Croatian company called Rimac who produce a sort of supercar equivalent. So I think it will come. But like you say, I think that kind of initial acceleration is probably anyhow.
Yeah, I'm actually fascinated by the point you raised about V2G and V2L and the integration between home and the car. As you might remember, I spent a bunch of time at EDF when we were first talking. And we used to sit there at EDF and go, listen, electric car owners are hugely important to energy companies because the volume at home goes up by about 60%. So suddenly you're selling more electrons. Then you've got the ability to obviously integrate into that household all these different technologies, the battery, the solar, etc.
When people get an EV, the first thing they do is they need to then address their charging, whether they're lucky enough to have the ability to charge it at home, maybe they need a charger, or maybe they've got to work out their local ways that they can charge it. Then typically they look at their energy tariff. Then they start to think about, well, could I generate my own energy? Can I store my own energy? How does this affect, how I heat and cool my property? From our perspective, we're entering this new early mainstream period. So, I mean, we've just seen so many amazing technologies. There's a real rush now. I can't believe we've come from this point where there were only 10 cars I could display at a show to now there are 300. And it's all the electric bikes, it's all the electric micromobility, the big stuff like electric boats and electric vertical takeoff and landing, all the home tech. It's still relatively early in this game, ironically. For people like us who've been in it a while, we're desperately impatient for it to all happen a bit more quickly. But if I look back just 5-6 years, we've come so far, and the next 5 or 6 years I think is going to be extraordinary. Let's just try and work to make these technologies a bit cheaper. That's the one thing I would say.
The one final thought or question I have, having come from the technology background, eventually technology got to be where the hardware wasn't the differentiator anymore. It's the software that differentiates. And so, for example, I sold routers early on and built the internet and things like that. And today when you buy a router, really, it's not so much about the silicon. It's about the software running on it. You can basically buy the silicon and use it. Do you think EVs will get to that point where it's really just about the software and not so much about the hardware?
I think we're seeing, a bit of a divergence now. If an Audi customer typically would buy another Audi and a BMW customer would typically buy another BMW, the conquest rates for people to skip from one of those cars into a Tesla or a Polestar or a Kia or a Hyundai or whatever it may be are incredibly high. Like the industry's never seen anything like it before. I think that loyalty might crystallize again over the next 5-10 years once people have flirted with their first electric car, maybe their second electric car, maybe third electric car. But the reality is that the Chinese cars are good and they are well made, but the tech is better than on the German equivalents, for example. It's very well known that VW is an amazing company with amazing heritage. I actually think their VW ID3, ID4 are very, very good cars, but it is a well-known fact that actually they have struggled with software. And therefore, what you may well find is that the VW ID3 driver might say after 2 or 3 years, well, I'm not sure about that. Maybe next time I'll look elsewhere. And some of the Chinese companies with the tech is really, really fantastic. And again, Tesla can be thanks for kind of making that part of the mix. So I think those cars will look very, very different. I recently sat in the BYD Seal, which is the BYD's kind of competitor to the Tesla, and they've gone for the exact same screen size as the Tesla Model 3 and the Tesla Model Y. Why? My theory is because it works. You know, they know it works. They've got one little quirk though, and it's a bit of a gimmick, I suppose. You press a button and it actually can spin round, so it can go from portrait to landscape mode as well if you want it to. But the reality is that the Chinese have been working on this moment, developing these cars from a long way out, and of course they're very close to the supply chain, Chris, as well, in terms of they're very close to the battery materials, all those sorts of things. So they're in a very, very strong position indeed. And I hope that as many of the car companies make it through this and respond as quickly as they can. But it does seem to me, elephants don't dance sometimes. These are big companies, and it could be a tough time for them, right?
It's with the visions of elephants dancing that we unfortunately have to come to an end of this episode. What a great conversation. I want to thank you so much for being our guest today on Insider's Guide to Energy. It's been a pleasure having you, Dan. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been my absolute pleasure.
For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Insider's Guide to Energy EV series. What a great session. I love these crossover episodes. I love hearing about fully charged. Thank you again, Dan. If you've enjoyed this show as much as we have, if you're a first-time listener to Insider's Guide to Energy, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to comment and find us on YouTube as well. And we'll see you again next time on the Insider's Guide to Energy EV series. Bye-bye for now.